Is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. The Constitution gave Congress the power to declare war. The Constitution gave Congress the power to appropriate money for war. The Congress gave us the power to raise and support armies and to provide and maintain a navy. Why? Why didn't the framers just give the president the power to declare and wage war? After all, the president is made commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy, and the militias, when called into the actual service of the United States, it would have been a lot simpler to say, let the president go to war whenever he wants. Why didn't they do that? Well, the framers acted against a background of kings and princes plunging their populations into wars of vanity and political advantage to distract their people at home from the political problems of the kingdom, of the monarchy. And our framers were emphatic that the awesome power of war, the power over life and death of our sons and daughters, the power over our national treasure not be invested in one man alone, but rather in American democracy itself, the representatives of the people of Maryland and Virginia and Florida and California and Idaho and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Alaska and Hawaii. That's who the framers vested the power of war in, the Congress of the United States. Now, the structural problem is that if the nation is actually attacked, or there's an imminent attack coming, the president may need to respond in self-defense. Madison anticipated that, and Madison said that might happen. The Supreme Court in 1863, in the middle of the Civil War, in the Price cases, said that the president can act in those situations. Lincoln embargoed and blockaded the southern states, and that was attacked as unconstitutional. And they said, well, he was acting against a real imminent threat to the land and the people of the country. Now, after the Vietnam War, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution in 1973, providing the president may engage our forces in hostilities only with a declaration of war, a statutory authorization, or a national emergency created by an attack upon our people or our armed forces. Now, under the War Powers Act, the president must consult Congress if he thinks that he's acting in imminent self-defense of the country. The president didn't do that. He talked to some other people at Mar-a-Lago. He never talked to the Congress of the United States. Neither officially, the Republicans nor the Democrats. He didn't contact the so-called Gang of Eight of our top leadership in the intelligence and security field. He did notify us, in fairness to the president, within 48 hours of his targeted killing, which many see under international law as an act of war. At this point, though, whether you think there was truly an imminent crisis, and this was something like Pearl Harbor, or you think that the president still has not given us a single compelling justification for why he did it in acting under imminent self-defense.
Gentleman, time has expired.
Gentleman, additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. So whether you think there was compelling justification or no justification at all, it doesn't make any difference. All of us, everybody in this chamber at this point should say that whatever imminent threat existed, whatever emergency there was, is gone. And now this country should not go to war without a declaration of war by this Congress or statutory authorization, unless we are attacked in the meantime. That's the whole point of the War Powers Resolution, to enforce the powers of Congress. We represent the people. We should not be going to war in the name of the United States based on the word of one man. That's not the constitutional design. It must be the Congress itself. I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.